So in today's video, we are going to be discussing if the Baltimore Ravens are contenders in the AFC. Now, before we get into the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's jump right into the video. To answer the question right out of the gate, I think you would be a fool to not consider the Baltimore Ravens a contender in the AFC. I know that they're in a very tough conference and their division is very tough, but I think you would be crazy to say that the Baltimore Ravens are not a contender, especially I know last season didn't end like we thought it would for the Ravens, but there is a lot of things that happened last year that were out of the control of the Baltimore Ravens that you cannot blame them on for what happened and how their season shook out last year. So I think you'd be crazy to not consider them contenders in the AFC. And I know that every team in the AFC has gotten better, it feels like, in some way, especially the AFC West. Their division has gotten better. Every division and every team, it feels like, in the AFC has gotten better in some way. So it's not going to be just an easy road, but I can see the Ravens easily making a deep playoff push this year, maybe possibly representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. Now that's going to be an even tougher road because of just how competitive I think the conference is going to be as a whole. But the Ravens, to not consider them a contender, at least for the playoffs, would be kind of crazy in my eyes. And I think you should at least even consider them a contender in their division, because I just think what happened last year is not what we saw from the Baltimore Ravens. They are a very consistent franchise. They've only had 2 losing seasons since 2008, and you could chalk up last year's losing season to the fact that they were injured like crazy. But if we're looking at the Baltimore Ravens and just their offseason as a whole, they've had an interesting offseason, but it's nothing that's been too terribly bad. Obviously, the biggest thing is Lamar Jackson's contract, and I'll be the first one to admit I don't understand his contract situation whatsoever. I've tried to read about it. I've tried to listen to other people talk about it. To me, it's a very confusing situation because it feels like the Baltimore Ravens want to pay Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson just really hasn't done much when it comes to his contract to try to get paid this offseason. So it's kind of a weird situation in my opinion. Now, obviously, Lamar deserves to get paid a lot of money for a lot of reasons. One, the offensive scheme that the Baltimore Ravens run fits specifically what Lamar Jackson does and his legs and his ability to run the football. So that's number one. The run game as a whole is built for that offense to be successful. And another thing is Lamar Jackson last year did show strides in becoming a better passer in the pocket and just making better throws last year at times. Like, he was on track, it felt like, before he got injured himself, that he was making the right strides to become a better passer. And on top of that, Lamar Jackson's a league MVP. So the fact that the simple fact is he deserves to get paid, and paid a lot of money. Now, you could say that Deshaun Watson and his contract kind of ruined a lot of things, and I can fully see that. Giving a guy like Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed kind of screwed every team, and I guarantee you 31 owners right now are upset about what happened with Deshaun Watson and his contract. No one in their right mind should be happy about that contract from a business side and also from a personal side. There is nothing that was good from that contract. And if we're talking about Lamar's contract, yeah, he definitely deserves a fully guaranteed contract. Is it going to be $230 million? Who knows? We really don't know. If we're talking just purely off of winning, Lamar Jackson has done more of that than Deshaun Watson in his career. That is something that you could keep in mind, that Lamar Jackson probably should get paid more. But even if they're not going to give him $230 million guaranteed, there is no reason why Lamar Jackson shouldn't get a contract like Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr. Like, I think you look at those contracts, I think it's fair to say that Lamar Jackson should definitely be in the range of those guys. In my opinion, higher, but I just don't see any reason why he shouldn't be getting that kind of money. He could be trying to prove himself, but at the same time, he does deserve to get paid, but I don't know what to make of this situation. If he truly is waiting to win a Super Bowl to get paid, I feel like he's just betting on himself to get even more money in the future. But if you look at it, he has this year coming up, and then the Ravens could franchise tag him twice, so he's still going to make a lot of money from the Ravens no matter what happens. That's pretty much evident. We know that for a fact. But when it comes to his contract, if he's betting on himself, I think, if it works out for Lamar and he bets on himself huge, he's going to get a massive payday. But if we're looking at the Ravens and their chances to contend in the AFC, in my opinion, it chalks down to one simple thing, and that is injuries. It felt like everybody for the Baltimore Ravens last year was injured at some point. Some guys missed the entire season, and you had Lamar Jackson who even missed time last year. If we're looking at some guys that were injured last year, key players that were out that missed time, you have Gus Edwards, Rashad Bateman, J.K. Dobbins, Marcus Peters, Ronnie Stanley, Marlon Humphrey, and Lamar Jackson Jackson himself. All those guys were injured at some point last season, and many more were injured. So if we're looking at the Ravens and their chances to contend, it comes down to injuries, but there is no chance that this happens to the Ravens 2 years in a row. If this happens to the Ravens 2 years in a row with the amount of injuries that they've had, they have the worst injury luck of any team possibly ever. The fact is their season was derailed by injuries last year, and I think that's pretty evident. They were in first place of the entire conference of all of the AFC week 12 before the injury bug started to catch up with them, and they were on track to make the playoffs, to have a really good season. They were 8-3, first place in the AFC, but everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and they just started to get a whole bunch of injuries, and everything just started to fall downhill for the Baltimore Ravens late in last season. But if we're looking at, say, the draft that the Ravens had this year, they had a really good draft. They basically reinforced that defense that was injured last year. Their defense was one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year, especially their pass defense. But again, that was chalked up due to injuries. I think that's pretty obvious. If you didn't see that, I don't think you understand what happened to the Ravens. Their secondary was injured like crazy last year, so they got some reinforcement. They're going to get some of their guys healthy back from last year who were injured, and they have to continue to play at the level that they were before they got injured for this Ravens team to continue to be successful. But they got Kyle Hamilton, who is a really good safety who's going to fit in that system well. They added David Ojabo and Travis Jones on that defensive line, so there's going to be a lot of good talent, young talent on that defense for the Ravens next year, along with everybody coming back. So the defense, you can automatically assume, is going to be much better. Offensively, they drafted Tyler Linderbaum, so that that their offensive line is basically set up to run the football and continue to be a ground and pound football team with Lamar Jackson, with their running backs in that scheme. So they're just doubling down on running the ball more. Now, obviously, the pass game, for me personally, I'm always concerned with the Ravens and their pass game that they need receivers. But if guys like Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay step up, I think the Ravens will be just fine at the receiver position. And you also have to keep in mind Mark Andrews is one of the more talented tight ends in the NFL, one of the best. So Mark Andrews is on his game. The Ravens pass game will be just fine. And I don't think that the pass game for the Ravens will necessarily be something you have to worry about. It's just the receivers on the outsides definitely have to step up a little bit more, just for the fact that I do think that they have a lack of receiving talent compared to some teams in the AFC and in their division. And if we're looking at their division, like I said, it's going to be tough to compete in, but I do think that there is some positives to the Ravens and some chances that they do win. Obviously, when it comes to the Bengals, they cannot get blown out by them twice like they did last year. That's first and foremost. If we're looking at the Steelers, I think they have a good chance against the Steelers, because if you're looking at them, they might be starting Mitchell Trubisky, or a rookie quarterback, and with them having a good defense, I think that's a favorable matchup for them. If we're looking at the Browns, that situation is just becoming a mess again, and we have no idea what's going to be happening with the Browns. So I think at this point you can kind of chalk up a couple wins against the Browns for the Ravens. I really do like what the Ravens have going for them. Now, obviously, they did lose Hollywood Brown this offseason, so we'll really see how the pass game does change with him being gone. I do think that in a way it might hurt the Ravens just a tad bit, at least to start the season. But like I said, if those other guys step up and Mark Andrews is making an impact, I think they'll be just fine. And then if we're also looking at the Ravens schedule, I think the Ravens have a really favorable schedule for them. They have some opponents that they should beat. They have some tougher opponents that they still should beat, and they have a lot of opponents on there that are going to be really tough matchups that are going to make those some games, some very close games. But I do think all in all, the Ravens did fix everything they needed to fix to become better. The main thing, injuries, make sure everybody's healthy. That's number one. And the draft, they added a ton of talent. They still have Lamar Jackson, who's a league MVP, and he, like I said, he was evolving as a passer last year before he got injured, and just things started to spiral out of control for the Ravens last year. So overall, I do think the Ravens are contenders in the AFC, whether it's a playoff run or a Super Bowl run. I think that the Ravens do have a chance to make some noise in the playoffs, be a team that's obviously going to be tough to beat. They're not going to be a team that's going to be injured like this last year. And if they're injured like this again last year, I just feel bad for them, because the injuries that they got obviously hurt them last year, and they were very significant injuries to some very significant players on their football team. But those are my thoughts on if the Ravens are Super Bowl contenders in the AFC. Give me your thoughts down below. Do you think the Ravens are Super Bowl contenders in the AFC, or do you think they're not? Give me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one.